Welcome everybody to Module 12, which is all about selling in Amazon EU. Now, for many years, selling to Amazon customers in the EU was almost as easy as selling to customers in the UK, but unfortunately this did change as a result of Brexit, and many sellers simply ceased with this area of their business. Now, that may sound depressing, but fear not folks, because all is not lost. And for those who do wish to start up or return to their EU customer base, there are still plenty of options when selling on Amazon. So in this module, we will start with a quick refresh of some of the EU related material that we covered in earlier modules, and we're then going to focus on the Amazon EU selling programs, and you'll find that most of them use the Fulfilled by Amazon approach, but we will also look at your seller fulfilled options too. And then finally, we'll go over some of the procedural and administrative requirements that you need to think about when selling into the EU. Let's start by returning briefly to the concept of the EU Unified Account. And as you know, registering as an Amazon UK seller automatically links you to the rest of Amazon EU, which includes a growing number of countries, most of which are listed here. Now, you can use a single interface to manage all of your Amazon EU stores, and you can pay your fee using a single subscription to cover all of them. As we know, you can offer your products across all of the EU marketplaces or just some of them. You can use add a product or edit products to make this happen. And then you can also create shipping templates, which include selected international destinations. Now, although we've also covered how to register and use the Amazon UK FBA programme, we've not yet extended this to the EU. But as you'll see, the FBA programme works the same in the EU as it does in the UK. It's just a matter of following the same process together with some additional administrative steps, and you will learn more about them. Now, as mentioned in the previous slide, you can use both Fulfilled by Merchant and Fulfilled by Amazon to reach your EU customers, but the FBA programs are likely to bring more opportunity, and so I will cover them first. I will say, folks, it's not always easy to find and recognise the EU selling programmes. There's no handy single page that lists all of them there, but seasoned sellers do eventually work out what they all are, and we have 5 here that we can tell you about that are generally available for UK sellers. So we have FBA Export, Sell My Products Globally, the European Fulfilment Network, Multi-Country Inventory, and the Pan-European Programme. Before we move into the detailed thought, it's useful to revisit the pre-Brexit and post-Brexit situation. And I don't simply do this just to torture us all with a nostalgia trip about the good old days. I do this because it is actually useful for you to understand the history and evolution of these programmes and to fully grasp the background and the context of the current setup. It's all still meaningful. So until December 2020, UK sellers did benefit from free movement of goods, and other than some extra postage, we were able to serve our EU customers the same as we did here in the UK. Now, this free movement of goods, when coupled with this very highly efficient Amazon logistics, did open the doors for very attractive selling programs to be developed by Amazon within the EU, and as a result, many Amazon UK sellers expanded very successfully into Amazon's European stores. Now, everything of course changed following Brexit because a new customs border was introduced which prevented the free movement of goods, and this consequently prevented most of the FBA programs from operating between the UK and the EU. So obviously much dismay amongst Amazon UK sellers, but we are now a few years down the line and there has been some progress. The doors have been opening again, albeit the UK the access that the UK has is kind of more complex and a bit more expensive than it was before. So Sell My Products Globally and the European Fulfilment Network have now been reintroduced, and Amazon has also created new pathways aimed at helping UK sellers to access the Pan-EU network. And I would say also that at the very least, there's just far more information available, not so much guesswork anymore. So it means it's easier for sellers to assess the financial viability of the programs. But anyway, let's move on and look at each of these in a bit more detail. First one is called FBA Export. It's not actually been affected by Brexit to the extent that the other ones have, but that is because it's actually a worldwide programme rather than being specifically focused on the EU. This programme allows global Amazon shoppers to view products directly on Amazon UK and to place orders for any seller products that have been enabled. Amazon will then ship orders to the customers using your FBA stock, and they will deal with the paperwork on your behalf. You will be issued with invoices though, just so that you can identify the products that you've exported. Now, although this programme is available globally, it's actually limited use in the EU because most EU customers will shop on their own home marketplace. So in other words, a customer in France is likely to be shopping on Amazon France rather than wandering it into your Amazon UK store. Nonetheless though, definitely worth enabling your account settings to ensure that the FBA export is available for any overseas customers, whether they're EU or further afield. Now you'll find the FBA export settings under the little cog in the top right hand corner of your account. Look for account settings fulfilled by Amazon, and in there you'll find all of your FBA settings, including your cross-border ones, and that applies to all of the programs that I'm speaking about here today. For FBA export, make sure you've enabled it for worldwide and that you read the conditions and restrictions before agreeing to the terms. Sell My Products Globally, well, this is another program which can be enabled simply from within your account settings. And this program does allow Amazon to translate and replicate your UK product pages into other EU countries. And those pages can then be offered to anybody looking to buy in the EU. Now, Amazon will normally only do this translation, etc., if you, the seller, are not currently offering your products in the EU, either because you've not created the product page or offer yourself, or because you're not currently operating in the EU. But either way, when Amazon's created the page, customers in the EU can then browse the page in their own marketplace, they can place an order, and in that case, Amazon will instantly purchase the product from you, they will remove it from your FBA inventory, and they will send it directly to the EU customer. Now, clearly there's a number of stages involved in that, but as far as the customer and you are concerned, it all happens in one seamless transition. Now, although you're serving an EU customer here, it's indirect really, and it's not actually classed as an export because it was Amazon rather than you that offered the product for sale in the overseas countries. So in the event of the order, it's Amazon UK who purchased the item from you, not the overseas customer. Amazon has just then supplied it onwards to them. So for you, the process and the price is no different to any other domestic order. And I have to say, folks, this can be a great way to get started, but a couple of things just to bear in mind in terms of your flexibility. Firstly, when it's Amazon that create the page, well, you don't really have any control over the product pages that Amazon chooses to translate, and or you don't get to control the countries that they appear in. And similarly, if the product page is being created by Amazon, then it will not appear anywhere in your managed inventory, meaning that you're not really getting to edit the page or do anything with it. But again, always worth activating this setting. You'll find it in the same section as you will for FBA export and account settings fulfilled by Amazon under the little cog. So yep, I would say go ahead and check that that is already enabled. Moving on now to the European Fulfillment Network, also known as EFN. With this programme, it's you and not Amazon who creates the product pages and offers in the target EU marketplace, and this may mean that you'll be using some of the Build International Listings tools that we described in earlier modules. You can do this at the original point of adding your product pages, or you can edit the offer section of your page. Now, all products in this case will appear in your Manage Inventory tab within the respective store accounts. Again, customers can view this product page from their own local marketplace and they can order. When the order comes in, Amazon will ship the product to the EU customer directly from your FBA stock in the UK. They'll also deal with any paperwork, but this time it's you, the seller, who's classed as the exporter. Now, EFN was originally withdrawn from UK sellers in late 2020, but it was reintroduced after about a year, and it still works the same way as far as everybody else in the EU is concerned. It works the same way for UK as well, but there are some notable exceptions. So firstly, EFN seller fees, as you can imagine, are higher than they used to be due to the additional cross-border charges that Amazon incurs when shipping between the UK and the EU. And secondly, product and order eligibility may be more restricted, with certain products being excluded from the programme for various reasons, often related to value, dimensions and other customs restrictions. Now, everybody was delighted to see that the EFN programme is back. It is a popular option for sellers who wish to explore and develop their EU market without adding too much complication to their operations, albeit it is a bit more expensive. Now, when we look at the next two programmes, you'll see that there's increased benefits to these two, but there's also more upfront administration and logistics required as well. So let's start with the Pan-European programme, or Pan-EU for short. This programme can be regarded simply as just a much bigger version of the FBA network that operates in the UK. So in other words, Amazon's got FBA warehouses all over the EU and they are available for you to use. At present, Amazon has FBA warehouses in the UK, France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Poland and the Czech Republic, but we know that there are others coming on board. Remember that Amazon might well have FBA warehouses in other countries in Europe, but they will not necessarily be part of the Pan-EU network as such. Now, prior to Brexit, Pan-EU sellers in the UK only needed to send their stock to UK warehouses, and from there, Amazon distributed the products across the EU warehouses. Now, this, folks, was a simple, cost-effective and a very practical way to expand your UK operations right across the rest of Europe. And as I said previously, it was a highly successful model for many UK sellers. But aspects of the model have changed now, and so any UK seller who wishes to use Pan-EU are required to send their stock directly to the FBA warehouses in the EU countries of choice. So in other words, Amazon will no longer ship or distribute any bulk FBA stock from the UK to the EU. They will only distribute stock that has been shipped to the EU first, and you can understand why it has to be that way. Another big change as well is that the Pan-EU programme used to require sellers to enable storage in 6 named EU countries. Now, this enabled Amazon to then have complete freedom over where to store products throughout Europe, but this also no longer the case. So rather than having these 6 countries, sellers can now opt for a minimum of 2 EU countries and also almost have a sort of mini Pan-EU programme on the go. They can opt for a minimum of 2, but they can still go for 6 or whatever if they prefer. So the Pan-EU programme has evolved really into something which can be a little bit more tailored to each company based on the number of countries that they have selected. Now, once enrolled, products that are for sale and which are stored in the selected countries will be eligible for the Prime badge, and they will also incur lower local fulfillment fees. Now, as you can see, there are obvious benefits to all of this, including higher sales, but UK sellers also need to assess whether the benefits outweigh the costs, because there's logistical and accounting costs that you will need to take into account when you're looking at the overall benefit. And when you're looking at this, folks, just a few points for you to bear in mind. Remember to check your products, because some products and selling categories they have to be eligible for cross-border movement within the EU, otherwise Pan-EU logistics can't apply, so make sure you check that out. Secondly, products are only eligible if they are enrolled in the Pan-EU programme, and they must have an active status in your inventory, and they must be physically in stock in all of the countries that you are trying to operate in. And then thirdly, sellers must be VAT registered for any EU country in which stock is held. We'll cover a little bit more of this in the next slide. Now, remember as well that if you're storing stock in any EU country, you can also activate the FBA export, the Sell My Products Globally, and the European Fulfillment Network programs. They will all operate from any individual country where you have stock stored. The final programme is called Multi-Country Inventory, or MCI for short. It's a little bit of a funny one now because it's quite old. In fact, it was the first EU programme for UK sellers. So back then there was no Pan-EU programme, and so any sellers who wanted to start expanding out into Europe could simply do so by just targeting individual EU countries. And the same process still applied, where they could send their stock directly to each country. They would benefit from Prime eligibility and lower FBA fees. But remember that when Pan-EU was introduced, many sellers then started to use it, but it did require a presence in at least 6 countries. Therefore, multi-country inventory program was still useful for any seller who was operating in less than 6 countries. And I would say now that MCI, it still exists, but it's really mentioned or promoted really. And now that Pan-EU has started to offer reduced versions of itself involving a minimum of 2 countries, we could probably reasonably expect that MCI will disappear eventually, and we might see just a wider EU programme being introduced which just features the option to make individual country selections. But that's just a bit of a guess, and we shall see. As you've seen then, these programmes offer the opportunity to grow your European sales, but when you're sending your stock in bulk to Amazon's warehouses, there are various prerequisites that you need to be aware of, and I'm just going to cover some of them here. As we mentioned, firstly, you need to be registered for VAT in any EU country that you want to send stock to. Now, this is a requirement of EU law, and it applies regardless of any sales you make in that country. So the VAT liability is not linked to any sales you make. The liability arises as a result of you holding stock in that country. Secondly, when you are sending stock to the EU, either you or your appointed representative will be classed as the importer of record, meaning that you're responsible for ensuring completion of customs paperwork and export procedures, along, of course, with any payment of duties and taxes. Third, there is a legal requirement for you to hold a UK EORI number for the purposes of exporting from the UK, and you also need to have an EU EORI number for the purposes of importing into the EU. Obviously, before Brexit, you just needed to hold a single EORI number which covered everything, but you now need both. Now, if you do want to ship bulk stock into Amazon's EU warehouses, folks, I would recommend that you look carefully at the partnership arrangements and programs that Amazon has introduced. These have been put into place for UK sellers who want to operate in the EU. Now, these programs have been evolving since Brexit. I would say there's been a few false starts with stuff that just didn't quite seem to work. That was more from my own sort of perspective. But these programs that are in place now feel like they're finally become more accessible and cost efficient. They're still a bit more expensive than the good old pre-Brexit days, but definitely they're getting back to having some sort of viability. Now, I also need to say here that your advisors, we all have useful insight and experience to share with you, but we're not professionally qualified to advise on matters about tax and duty and customs and accounting and stuff like that. So do make sure that when you're looking at making some pretty serious high-level decisions about your business, make sure that you get qualified advice on this as well. And remember also that the advice on this slide does relate only to the export of bulk stock to EU warehouses. We're not looking here at the export of individual orders to EU customers, but we are just about to cover that on the next slide. Clearly then, there is a lot to think about when expanding into the EU, but it is a very large market, and once you've worked through the logistical steps, then it could prove to be a great move for your business. We've seen that the FBA selling programs are most worthy of consideration, but remember that you can start exporting immediately using Fulfilled by Merchant. And in Module 4, we covered some of the methods of activating your international shipping settings and rates for the countries that you want to deal with. But remember that you are going to be using your own choice of courier here, so you need to do your research first. Find out about the services that are on offer, the logistics, the prices. You need to do all of this before you create your shipping settings, obviously. And remember also another crucial Amazon policy that you have to comply with. Amazon states that EU customers should not be subject to additional import charges when they purchase a cross-border product from the UK. So this basically means that VAT and duty really have to have been taken care of by the seller or by Amazon prior to delivery. So to be clear, you cannot send your products to an EU customer expecting that they will pick up the VAT and import charges at the other end. It has to be a normal, seamless delivery as far as your EU customer is concerned. But there's various means of addressing this, and we'll cover this on the next slide. Now, before we just go and look into all, just remind you that when you are selling to the EU, your products are zero rated for VAT purposes. You're actually not legally responsible or required to pay the VAT up front. The only reason you would ever do this is through your own choice, because that's the customer service that you want to offer. Or in our case, it's because it's Amazon's policy that you have to do this. Now, obviously the prospect of having to pay VAT and duty up front does sound very unappealing, but as we say, it's Amazon's policy, folks, but it's actually no bad thing either, because it does reduce the risk of partial rejection. Remember, the EU customers, they're not used to paying charges for products they purchase from the UK, and if they're presented with a bill that they have to pay before they can collect their parcel, there is a high chance that they will just reject the parcel. You're going to lose your outgoing postage and possibly the item, or you have to pay the return postage back. So avoiding all of this has its benefits, as you can imagine. But how do we as UK sellers approach this? Well, there are various options included, and some of these are actually beneficial to your wider e-commerce business, I would say. So let's have a little look at them here. The first one is about import one-stop shop. So yes, the simplest way to ensure the EU customers are not inconvenienced by VAT and import charges is to take advantage of this new IOSS, or Import One-Stop Shop scheme. Now, this IOSS scheme has got nothing to do with Brexit, folks, and I only say that because lots of people do think it's related to Brexit, but it's not. It's actually part of the new EU VAT scheme, which came into play in July 21. Now, the IOSS scheme was introduced to simplify the VAT regime across the EU, and when you're selling on a marketplace like Amazon, it actually gives you two choices for how you can meet these VAT requirements. So any seller who is operating outside the EU, including the UK, can register for an IOSS number instead of using multiple EU country VAT numbers, okay? Now, they can register with register for an IOSS number with any EU country of their choice, okay? Thereafter, their EU customers will continue to just see and pay a normal VAT inclusive price on their product. Nothing's changed as far as they're concerned. And as we do here in the UK, the seller then just has to report these sales, collect the VAT that's applicable according to the country that they're registered in, and submit a single VAT return to their selected tax authority with a single VAT bill. So it's exactly like we do here in the UK, except with IOSS, it is covering the whole of the EU. Now, even better thought is that Amazon itself, as a marketplace, is also classed as a deemed supplier, and that means that they're responsible also for collecting VAT from EU customers and paying the VAT bill on behalf of any seller who doesn't have their own IOS number. Now, those sellers who mostly sell on marketplaces can operate entirely in the EU simply by using the IOSS number, which will be provided to them by the respective marketplace, including Amazon. But sellers who've got a strong EU presence with their own independent website, they are more likely to want to register for their own IOSS number as well. Now, if you are using IOSS, all you need to do then, folks, is record or write the IOSS number on the parcel that you're sending to the EU, and this is normally sufficient for it to clear customs, at least from a VAT and duty perspective, okay? Now, a couple of exemptions to tell you about. IOSS does not apply to B2B sales. It only covers B2C sales, which will probably be most of what you're dealing with on Amazon. It only applies to products with a value less than €150. Again, hopefully that will include most of your stuff. And then there's some other exclusions like second-hand goods. Items which attract excise, such as alcohol, sadly, is excluded as well. And goods, obviously, which are already located in the EU are not covered by it. Now, so the IOSS scheme can be a bit of a lifesaver for you folks, especially when you're able to use Marketplace IOSS number. But if your products do fall outside the scope of IOSS, then you still have other options. You can continue to use individual EU VAT numbers, but you can also use deliver duty paid services. Now they weren't really available shortly after Brexit, but they have been evolving nicely over time. So in this case, you simply pay the required VAT and duty to the courier that you've given to deliver your order to your EU customer. The courier will then arrange for this to be remitted to the relevant tax authority on your behalf. But note, this only really works when your customer pays the full retail price for the product, but where it's treated as zero rated. As you can imagine, if the customer was paying a VAT exclusive price to you, then you would definitely be out of pocket if you then also had to pay VAT and duty to your courier as well. That should not happen, but it seems to happen sometimes. So just keep an eye on that. Check out settings and individual procedures just to see that everything's going to work fine, and obviously to ask us about it as well. And remember, as a further option, you've got lots of other logistical solutions that might have been generated by third-party companies. So, the UK sellers, we've got a need to cover our VAT. That means that their service providers are pretty quick in coming up for solutions. So have a look into some of the other solutions that might be out there. Amazon service providers page is sometimes a good place to look for some of that. Final slide then, folks, just to say that when using the Fulfilled by Merchant approach to exporting, then you have to complete a commercial invoice for each order. But depending on the sort of courier you're using, you will find quite different layouts for this, but I thought it'd be useful just to break it down into 4 basic sections, but what you will find almost as standard in any commercial invoice. You've got seller details, customer details, item details, and a customs value. Okay, now obviously the seller and customer details identify who the importing and exporting party are, so you've got the name, address and contact details for both parties. For the seller, you're then going to have the VAT number, the EORI number, terms of sale, shipping company, and also the reason for the export. So is it a sale, is it a sample, is it a gift? Customers, nothing much else to add for them unless they're also a business customer, in which case you may need to provide a VAT or tax number and an EORI number as well. When it comes to item details, then this allows for monitoring the nature, the source, the physical aspects and the value of the goods which are leaving and entering a country. So you're going to look at the quantity, both the number of parcels and the number of units within the parcels. You'll need a description, and this is for every individual sort of different item. You will have the tariff or the commodity codes, also known as HS codes. Country of origin, you'll have the weight of each item and the parcels, and you're also going to have the value of each item and the total consignment value as well. The customs value then is calculated using the value of the consignment, which is all the sort of item prices, and then they'll also add shipping and insurance costs onto that as well. Now that figure is the base price for calculating import duty and VAT. Okay, so once you've got the customs value, you will multiply that by the percentage rate of duty that applies. That can be calculated looking at the HMRC tariff tables. You're basically looking at what the tariff code is and what the rate of duty is for the importing and exporting country. Sometimes sounds complicated, but it's actually quite easy to use. Once you've got that duty figure, you'll be adding that onto the customs value, and then the final figure that gets calculated is that VAT gets put onto the top of that. So those figures will be important to you for the export process, but also for your accounts as well, anything that you need to be reclaiming, etc. So folks, that concludes the module on selling on Amazon EU. We've looked at specific EU selling programs offered. We've looked at FBA programs, but also the options to fulfill orders yourself. We've looked at some of the steps too that you need to take as a business in order to access the options for EU selling on Amazon. There's so much to digest here, folks. It's quite a big, complicated area, but if you focus on the important parts, then yeah, you can find your way through it. And I would say that if you did have a market in the EU prior to Brexit, or if you could see a potential market in one or more EU nations now, then all of this is worth researching and consider. And as always, we are here to help you. We've all got experience with it, and we've found some hacks and things that work and don't work. So bring your questions to the Q&A session. Bring them to your one-to-one sessions, and you can obviously post a question in the programme chat facility on Teams as well.